Hello, my name is Nina. Welcome to my channel, Inside the Mind of a Human Predator. Before I get into today's subject, which is gaslighting, I'd like to ask you to please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so that others would have access to this potentially useful information. So, first of all, what is gaslighting? Well, it's a psychologically manipulative technique that overrides your perception of reality. The term comes from a 1940s film in which a female protagonist was slowly being driven crazy through that manipulation technique. Now, I arrived at the idea of gaslighting backwards, so to speak. For years, I've been noticing the way that the media manipulates information to gain certain forms of control, and most people do the opposite. First, they possibly experience this on a personal level, and then they extrapolate to group levels, perhaps like a cult, and then to national and international levels. Now, for those of you who are not interested in politics, something that would possibly resonate is the very well-known case of the so-called weapons of mass destruction that were heavily present in the media in the early 2000s that led to the original invasion of Iraq, later to be disproven as non-existent. Now, this was a very well-known case of media and political gaslighting. So, to get back to the subject of gaslighting on a personal level, what is the purpose of gaslighting someone? The purpose is to gain control. Now, in, let's say, a business relationship, this may be the case of an unscrupulous business partner gaining control of your finances. In a personal situation like a friendship or romantic relationship, this is done to gain control over you while engaging in less than appropriate behaviors for that relationship. How does it feel? It feels surreal. Why does it feel surreal? It feels surreal because your perception of reality that is coming from your five senses that are essentially facts, such as, let's say, images, written information, things that you have personally seen and heard, is clashing with the denials of coming from this human predator, verbal denials usually, that are aimed at undermining your perceptions and ultimately overriding your perception of reality. So the significant sense of cognitive dissonance feels really unsettling, at times surreal, especially if it happens on a fairly frequent long-term basis in a maladaptive situation that you may find yourself in. What methods are used for gaslighting? The methods could be different because this is a psychological form of manipulation. The most obvious method is lying. And lying can be done in a very convincing way where the human predator in question with a long-term maladaptive personality style, narcissistic, psychopathic, malignant borderline, etc., is lying to your face in a very theatrical way. He or she's getting offended, he or she may be angry, the tears might be turned on, and so this is a way to basically override the facts that you had seen. So how does it feel? Initially, you experience a profound sense of cognitive dissonance, and the greater that sense is, the more surreal you would feel, especially if it's a long-term pattern of maladaptive behavior on the part of this harmful, destructive individual in your life. So let's assume that you've come across hard facts that your romantic partner is unfaithful to you. These may be obvious text messages that are completely inappropriate that had been, as you later find out, left for you to discover. And this is a fact. It's very hard to argue with this fact, and you confront your intimate partner about this situation. The partner in question ends up denying it, and initially you feel angry because he or she is denying facts that cannot be denied. Later on, though, because this person is so convincing and unshakable, you begin to question your own perception. Perhaps I hadn't seen these text messages. Perhaps I misunderstood the text messages. Perhaps the person who sent these text messages is a crazy stalker, and my intimate partner is a victim of this crazy stalker. And you actually may even end up apologizing to this individual who is engaging in gaslighting of this nature and harming you because you convince yourself that you've misunderstood the situation. So there are several steps to this. You begin with knowing what the facts are, and you end up at questioning what had happened and rationalizing what the harmful party had done. This issue of rationalizing actually reminds me of one of the many cases of gaslighting that I've been subject to, and this particular one is more insidious. I was running a small business, and I started losing access to particular websites that were password protected, which affected my ability to perform my job. And this job was sales-based, so whenever I would not have access for a day, for 2 days, it really affected my ability to put food on the table, and I was really, really stressing out. And I suspected one particular individual was behind this sabotage, this tortious interference. And at one point I even confronted this individual, but this individual convincingly denied doing so, and I began to rationalize what was happening with technical glitches, with something that I was doing wrong, even though it kept happening over and over again. And I was really, really stressed out in terms of my ability to make money. And then, anyway, let's get back to my list. So this is particularly insidious, as this is the way your mind works. When someone appears to be offended, and this is someone in either position of authority, and why would you question them? You trust them. Or someone in a friendship situation, family situation, romantic situation, where you also have that level of trust. And when they're frothing at the mouth, denying whatever had happened, the natural inclination for you with this individual is to question yourself and your own perceptions. So what gaslighting involves, in addition to lying, is taking advantage of this relationship where there is a certain level of trust, there is a certain level of intimacy, there is a certain long-term establishment of some kind of communication. And in my opinion, gaslighting can be very emotionally abusive. So what are the top 4 signs that you are being gaslit? Well, the number 1 sign is that you are questioning your sanity. Now, the reason that you're questioning your sanity doesn't come from everyone around you, unrelated individuals who say, you've been working too much, you need to get some rest, you've been acting a little weird. That's a very different situation. It comes, in this case, from the one person in your life with a long-term maladaptive pattern of behavior, narcissistic traits, psychopathic traits, etc., etc., etc. And this person has been trying to convince you over the long term that there's something wrong with you up here in your mind. Now, this person is not necessarily screaming at you, you're crazy. This person would likely do this in a much more skilled way, and therefore in a much more manipulative way. He or she would try to pretend that he or she has great concern for your well-being. You know, you haven't been yourself lately. You've been a little bit weird. I'm very concerned about your health. Maybe you should go get yourself checked out. So it's presented, once again, taking advantage of this interpersonal relationship that you have established in a particular level of communication, perhaps a certain level of intimacy, taking advantage of that to make it seem like he or she is very concerned about the way you're acting. And you in combination with all these surreal instances of cognitive dissonance, start thinking that perhaps there is something wrong with you. Perhaps you should go and get yourself checked out. And over the last year or so, I've received several messages and emails where people, men and women, describe their own personal experiences, and in many of them, when they were being gaslit consistently, they had gone and talked to a mental health professional because they really thought there was something wrong with them, because they were being convinced that in fact there is, as their reality is constantly being overridden by this one individual. And if this is a destructive relationship, personal romantic relationship, most likely the target of gaslighting is isolated, so there's not a lot of validation of reality coming from other sources. The main source is that human predator, so it's not like this target can go and then validate what happens with others, whether for reasons of isolation, shame and embarrassment, etc., etc., etc. Number 2 sign that you are being gaslit is the fact that you're constantly apologizing to this person. And it's that cycle that I described previously, where whenever there is a confrontation between facts and this individual's denial and lying, you eventually end up arriving at the conclusion that perhaps the facts are wrong, perhaps you misunderstood. And if this person is using other manipulation techniques like the silent treatment and pretends to be offended, even though in reality he or she had lied to you about something really significant and hurtful, you end up apologizing, thinking, well, why would this person be ignoring me and, be acting offended if it weren't for something that I had done? And then you start thinking about the way you would act in a situation where you really were slighted and offended. I would probably ignore them for a little while too. So you're using the way that you, a neurotypical individual, would act in a particular situation, and then you're applying it to them where it may not apply at all. Now, sign number 3 is you are constantly rationalizing this human predator's behavior as well, which is of course linked to sign number 2. You try to explain away the facts, you try to explain why they would be acting offended, why they would disappear for days, because it's you who's accused them of things that they hadn't actually done. So you're doing the combination of the two. You're rationalizing and you are apologizing. And finally, sign number 4. You are experiencing such significant sense of cognitive dissonance on a long-term pervasive basis, and it feels so surreal that you have to validate your reality by recording it. You may take screenshots of messages and emails that were sent. You may even record conversations on your cell phone in order to go back to them as factual documentation that this person in question, the human predator with narcissistic or psychopathic, etc. traits, had actually said and done these things, because there is this long-term pattern of denying them after the fact. So this documentation of reality by taking screenshots, photographs, even recording conversations may be one of the only ways a target of a human predator who's being gaslit repeatedly has one of the only connections to reality, because if he or she is in an abusive scenario, he or she may be isolated. So to go back to my original story that I was telling you, what ended up happening is that eventually I got a hold of some IP addresses that validated my initial suspicions, my instinct that the person I suspected of engaging in tortious interference in fact did. And I ended up leaving that job because it was toxic, and the rest is history. But the interesting aspect of the story is the fact that I knew this individual was maladaptive and had gaslit me before. B, more important, I knew what gaslighting was. And I still went through the mental process of initially being very angry, having seen certain facts, and then being confronted with the lies that were convincing, I began to find other explanations in my mind, thinking that it's either me or a technical glitch. So I rationalized this in my mind, knowing those two important things. Now imagine how it would be for those who are unaware of what gaslighting is and are unaware that this is being done deliberately to achieve a certain goal. This is why it's such an insidious manipulation technique. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.